Welcome back to this Frogplum Audiobook series. If you haven't heard part 1 yet, make sure to start there. Just click the tab in the top right corner to begin from the start. And if you find this helpful, subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss the next part. Now let's continue. Chapter 5. The Invisible Resistance. Why Your Subconscious Fights Change. Every person who tries to change eventually meets the same enemy. Not laziness, not lack of motivation, not bad luck, but a quiet, invisible force inside them that pulls them back to the familiar. That force is resistance. It can feel like procrastination, fear, overthinking, sudden exhaustion, or even self-sabotage. And if you do not understand it, resistance can convince you that change is impossible. In reality, resistance is a normal response from the subconscious mind. It is not a flaw. It is a protective mechanism. Educational note. This chapter explains common human reactions to change. It is for self-development only, and not medical or therapeutic advice. Let's begin with a simple truth. Your subconscious prefers survival over progress. Progress means growth, risk, unfamiliar territory. Survival means doing what you have always done. The subconscious cares about one thing: keeping you alive, not fulfilled, not courageous, not successful, just alive. That means anything new, even something you consciously want, may be interpreted as dangerous. To understand this better, picture your subconscious as a well-meaning but overprotective friend. Every time you try something new, that friend pulls you aside and whispers, "Are you sure? What if you fail? What if you look foolish? What if this hurts you?" This whisper often shows up as hesitation, doubt, negative self-talk, anxiety, distraction, avoidance, perfectionism, the sudden urge to do anything except the task that matters. These reactions are not signs of weakness. They are signs that your subconscious is trying to protect your current identity. Let's take a real example most people can relate to. Imagine someone who decides to start exercising after years of inactivity. On day 1, they are excited. On day 2, motivated. On day 3, a small voice appears. "You're too tired. You'll start tomorrow." You're not the type to stick with routines. Did their physical strength suddenly change? No. Their identity was challenged. Their subconscious prefers the version of them who stays comfortable. It does not know that the new behavior is good. It only knows it is unfamiliar. Resistance is not the enemy. It is a misunderstanding. Now let's look at something more personal. Throughout my life, every time I tried to step into a bigger version of myself, resistance showed up. Not always loudly. Sometimes in small, quiet ways. I would suddenly feel tired when it was time to work, or I would create new distractions, or my mind would convince me that this is not the right time. For years, I thought something was wrong with me, but over time, I realized the truth. I was fighting an internal force built from years of habit and self-protection. My subconscious was not trying to stop my success. It was trying to keep my identity stable. That is when my mother's words finally made sense. She always said, "Your biggest fight in life is yourself." She did not mean my personality or my weaknesses. She meant this resistance, the part of me that clings to the familiar, even when my future demands something new. Now let me share something from a well-known figure many people recognize. There are entrepreneurs, artists, and creators who admit that right before their breakthrough moments, they faced intense inner resistance. Some described feeling overwhelmed with fear. Some doubted their ability. Some nearly quit. This resistance did not appear because they were unqualified. It appeared because they were crossing the edge of their old identity. And identity change is the deepest transformation a person can experience. Understanding this is powerful, because once you know resistance is a predictable part of growth, you stop taking it personally. Let's break down the 3 main forms of resistance. 1. Fear of the unknown. Your subconscious sees uncertainty as danger. Any change, even positive change, triggers this fear. 2. Fear of identity loss. If you change a habit, you change who you believe you are. Identity change feels unstable to the subconscious. 3. Fear of consequences. What if I fail? What if people judge me? What if success brings new problems? The subconscious prefers the problems it understands over the problems it doesn't. These fears do not mean you cannot change. They mean the subconscious needs reassurance, not force. Let me show you a simple, gentle truth. Resistance is not a wall. It is a signal. It is your subconscious saying, "I don't understand this new behavior yet. Please teach me." The more calmly you respond to resistance, the faster it weakens. When you push aggressively, it pushes back harder. But when you observe it, breathe, and take one small step anyway, the subconscious begins to trust you. Change does not happen when resistance disappears. Change happens when you move forward even while resistance is present. Here is the mindset shift I want you to carry from this chapter. Resistance is a normal part of change, not a personal failure. It is evidence that you are stepping into something new. And with gentle persistence, your subconscious will begin to follow your lead. You are not fighting your mind, you are reteaching it. And teaching takes time, repetition, and patience. Micro practice for Chapter 5. 1. Think of one goal you currently want to achieve. 2. Notice one way resistance shows up related to that goal. 3. When resistance appears, pause and say, "This is my mind trying to protect me." 4. Take one small step toward your goal anyway. 5. Reflect afterward. Was the step easier than the fear suggested? In the next chapter, we will break down how the subconscious forms emotional associations and how you can begin shifting those emotions to support change instead of resisting it. Chapter 6. The Emotional Code. Why your feelings shape your future. If your subconscious is the engine of your life, then emotion is the fuel. Every belief you hold, every habit you repeat, every fear you avoid, and every dream you chase is influenced by how something once made you feel. People often try to change their thoughts first, but the subconscious listens to emotion before language. It stores what you feel, not what you say. This chapter explains why emotion is the real code that shapes your inner world. Educational note. This chapter discusses common human emotional learning patterns. It is for education and reflection only, and not medical or therapeutic advice. Let's begin with a truth that surprises many people. Your subconscious does not remember events as much as it remembers emotional experiences. You might forget a childhood conversation, but the emotion from it remains. You might not recall every detail of a difficult moment, but the emotional imprint stays alive. Emotion is how the subconscious decides what to protect, what to avoid, and what to repeat. If something once brought comfort, your subconscious stores it as safe. If something once brought pain, your subconscious stores it as danger. And every choice you make today is influenced by these emotional labels. Think about the first time you felt embarrassed in public, or the first time someone rejected your idea, or the first time you felt proud after doing something courageous. Your mind did not store the people, the location, or the exact words. It stored the feeling, embarrassment, rejection, pride, confidence. These emotional patterns then became instructions for your future. That is why someone who felt embarrassed speaking up as a child may avoid speaking up as an adult. Their subconscious is not holding on to the memory. It is holding on to the emotion of danger. And someone who felt praised for being helpful may feel guilty saying no, because the subconscious links helpfulness with love and acceptance. Emotion teaches the subconscious what identity to maintain. Let me bring this into a deeper personal example. There have been times in my life when I was filled with ideas, ambition, and energy. But when the moment came to act, I hesitated. It looked like fear. It felt like resistance. But underneath it was something else, an emotional memory. My subconscious had stored past experiences where taking a risk led to stress. It remembered moments where trying something new led to uncertainty. So every time I stepped toward a bigger version of myself, the emotional alarm went off. This alarm was not logical, it was emotional. And because the subconscious prioritizes emotion over logic, the alarm felt real. This is why emotional understanding is essential for change. You cannot negotiate with a feeling you do not recognize. Now let's look at a widely known pattern in successful people. Many high achievers admit that their biggest breakthroughs came not from new knowledge, but from overcoming old emotional associations. A writer who once feared criticism had to dissociate creativity from danger. An athlete who feared failure had to retrain their emotional response to pressure. An entrepreneur who feared losing stability had to create a new emotional link between risk and opportunity. The skill was not willpower, it was emotional rewiring. This tells us something powerful. Your future depends less on what you know and more on how you emotionally respond to your own potential. To understand emotional coding, you only need to remember 3 principles. 1. Emotion imprints faster than logic. You can hear the same advice 100 times and forget it, but one emotional moment can reshape your identity in seconds. This is why early childhood and adolescence have such a strong influence. It is not the age, it is the emotional intensity. 2. Your subconscious replays emotional memories as warnings or permissions. Every time you face something new, your subconscious asks, "How did this feel last time?" If the last feeling was fear, it signals danger. If the last feeling was warmth, it signals safety. 3. You can teach your subconscious new emotional meanings. This is where your power lies. Your subconscious is not stuck. It can learn new associations, but only through repeated emotional experiences. Let's take a simple example. Imagine someone who fears public speaking. The fear has nothing to do with words. It comes from an emotional code from years ago, often from a single moment of embarrassment. But if that person speaks in small, safe environments, and each time they finish with a sense of achievement, the emotional code begins to change. The subconscious slowly updates its instruction from danger to growth. Emotion rewrites emotion, not logic, not force, not pushing, experience and feeling. This is why people can dramatically change their lives when they consistently expose themselves to new emotional experiences, even small ones. Your subconscious learns through patterns. Patterns are built through repetition. Repetition is sustained through emotion. The more you practice emotions like courage, curiosity, hope, and calm, the more your subconscious treats them as familiar. And once they become familiar, they become automatic. This is how a person who believed they were unconfident becomes confident. Not instantly, not through affirmations alone, but through teaching their subconscious new emotional codes. Here is the mindset shift I want you to carry. Your subconscious is not powered by thoughts. It is powered by feelings. If you want your future to change, learn to change the emotional meaning behind your actions. When something scares you, ask, "What does my subconscious think it is protecting me from?" When something excites you, ask, "What new emotional code is trying to form?" This awareness alone begins transforming your inner world. Micro-practice for Chapter 6. 1. Think of a situation that triggers fear, hesitation, or avoidance. 2. Ask yourself, what emotion is my mind trying to protect me from right now? 3. Take 1 minute to imagine a calmer emotional response to that situation. 4. Breathe slowly and say, "I can teach my mind a new meaning." 5. Notice how the emotional tension shifts, even slightly. In the next chapter, we will explore how identity is formed in the subconscious and how changing identity is the most powerful transformation a person can experience. Chapter 7. Identity, the core program running your life. Every habit you repeat, every decision you make, and every dream you pursue is filtered through one invisible layer, your identity. Identity is the deepest program inside the subconscious mind. It determines not just what you do, but what you believe you are allowed to do. Who you believe you are sets the boundaries for who you believe you can become. This chapter explains how identity forms, why it feels so rigid, and how to gently update it so your future is not held hostage by your past. Educational note. The ideas in this chapter describe common psychological patterns of human identity formation. They are for education only, and not medical or therapeutic advice. Identity begins with repeated messages. Some messages you heard from others, some messages you told yourself. Some came from emotional experiences that carved themselves into your inner world. Over time, these messages formed statements like, "I'm the kind of person who struggles with money. I'm the kind of person who gets anxious. I'm the kind of person who never finishes things. I'm the kind of person who always helps others first. I'm the kind of person who is unlucky in love." These statements shape your behavior even when you do not say them out loud. You feel them, You carry them. You act according to them. Identity is the lens through which your subconscious sees the world. Let me give you a simple example from everyday life. Imagine two people deciding to wake up early and start exercising. One believes they are not athletic. The other believes they are someone who takes care of their body. Same goal, same behavior, different identity. Within a few days, their outcomes will drift apart, not because one is better, but because the subconscious makes choices that match identity. The person who believes they are not athletic feels resistance, doubts their progress, and gives up sooner. Their subconscious is trying to bring them back to their identity. The familiar feels safer than the new. Identity acts like a magnet. You are pulled toward behaviors that match it and repelled from behaviors that contradict it. Now let me bring this into something personal. For years, I carried identities I did not know I had. Identities shaped by childhood experiences, cultural expectations, and moments where I felt small or doubted myself. Some of these identities protected me, some limited me. Whenever I tried to start something big, a quiet voice inside whispered, "You're not that kind of person. You're not built for this. Stay where you know the rules." It felt like fear. It felt like procrastination. But in truth, it was identity. My subconscious was not fighting my goals. It was protecting the version of me it believed I needed to remain. Once I understood this, everything changed. I stopped fighting myself and began teaching my mind a new version of me. Let's look at a well-known pattern from many successful people. They often describe a turning point where their identity shifted before their results did. Athletes start to see themselves as champions before they win titles. Entrepreneurs start to see themselves as innovators before their companies succeed. Writers start to see themselves as authors before they publish anything. The shift is not magic. It is the subconscious aligning with a new identity. Once identity changes, behavior follows without force, because the subconscious finally sees the new path as normal. Identity is formed through 3 channels. 1. Repetition. Identity grows stronger every time you describe yourself a certain way or act in a certain pattern. The subconscious believes what it sees often. 2. Emotion. A single emotional moment can anchor a belief. If a child is praised strongly for being responsible, they may grow up over-carrying responsibility. If a teenager is criticized during a vulnerable moment, they may carry a negative identity far into adulthood. 3. Environment. The people around you influence how you see yourself. If you spend years in an environment where no one dreams big, dreaming big feels out of character. The subconscious adapts to the emotional climate you live in. Identity is not a conclusion. It is a reflection of repeated experiences. Here is the part that gives you power. Identity can be updated. Not instantly, not with just words, but with repeated emotional experiences that teach your subconscious a new version of who you are. If you want to become confident, you don't start by being confident. You start by practicing small moments of confidence. If you want to become disciplined, you don't start with perfection. You start by completing one small task when resistance appears. If you want to become successful, you don't wait for results to assign identity. You begin acting like the kind of person who pursues success consistently. Identity shifts slowly, then suddenly. Let me give you a simple mental model. Imagine your identity as a story you've been telling yourself for years. If you want to change your future, you must update the story. Not with fantasy, but with gradual new evidence. The subconscious is not persuaded by loud declarations. It is persuaded by consistent actions and calm emotion. Every time you take a step that contradicts your old identity, you weaken the old program. Every time you repeat a step that aligns with a new identity, you strengthen the new one. This is how people transform, not through force, through steady internal revision. Before we move forward, remember this. You are not stuck as one version of yourself. Identity is not fixed. It is shaped by experience, and you can create new experiences starting today. Your subconscious will eventually follow whatever identity feels most emotionally familiar. Your job is to make the identity you want familiar. Micro-practice for Chapter 7. 1. Write one old identity sentence you want to release. I'm the kind of person who. 2. Write one new identity you want to practice. I'm becoming the kind of person who. 3. Take a single action today that matches the new identity. 4. After doing it, pause and say, "This is who I'm learning to be." 5. Repeat this small identity action tomorrow. In the next chapter, we will explore how to build a structured subconscious reprogramming routine that begins reshaping your patterns from the inside out. Chapter 8. Rewriting the Inner Script. How to teach your subconscious a new story. By now you understand your subconscious. It follows patterns. It protects what is familiar. It listens to emotion more than logic. And it clings to identity, even when that identity no longer serves your future. In this chapter, we finally begin the part everyone waits for. How do you rewrite the inner script? How do you teach your subconscious a new story, a new identity, and a new direction? This chapter is not about force. It is about technique, patience, and repetition. Educational note. This chapter describes general approaches for habit change and self-development. It is for reflection only, and not medical or therapeutic advice. Let's begin with a simple idea that will guide everything that follows. Your subconscious learns through experience, not debate. This is why arguing with your fears does not remove them. It is why you cannot simply tell yourself, "I am confident now," and expect instant change. Words alone cannot override years of emotional learning. Your subconscious updates itself when it sees a new pattern repeated enough times to become believable. The process looks like this: awareness, small action, emotional reinforcement, repetition. This is the cycle that rewrites the inner script. Let's break down what that means. 1. Awareness, naming the old script. You cannot rewrite what you cannot see. Every transformation begins by noticing the pattern, not judging it, not fighting it, just seeing it clearly. For example, I avoid opportunities because I fear failing. I overthink because uncertainty feels dangerous. I delay tasks because they challenge my identity. Awareness is the moment you recognize the old script for what it is, a protective instinct from your past, not a command for your future. Awareness alone is powerful, but not enough. Once you name the old script, you must introduce a new one. This brings us to the next step. 2. Small action, teaching a new pattern. The subconscious does not trust big, sudden changes. It trusts small, repeatable actions that prove a new identity is safe. If the old script says, "You are the kind of person who gives up," your new script begins with finishing one small task today. If the old script says, "You are not confident," your new script begins with speaking up once in a low-pressure situation. If the old script says, "You procrastinate," your new script begins with working for 3 minutes instead of postponing everything. These actions seem small, but the subconscious pays attention. Every repetition becomes evidence that a new story is forming. Now comes the most important part of the process. 3. Emotional reinforcement, creating a new feeling. Your subconscious changes when the new action is paired with a new emotion. When you finish a small task and feel even a tiny moment of satisfaction, your subconscious registers it as a reward. When you speak up and feel relief afterward, your subconscious updates its fear response. When you take a step forward despite resistance and feel proud, you create emotional proof that the new path is safe. Emotion is the glue that attaches the new script to your identity. This is why you should never rush the process. Change is not just behavior, it is emotional education. Finally, the last step. 4. Repetition, making the new story familiar. Your subconscious becomes loyal to whatever feels familiar. If you repeat a new pattern enough times, it eventually becomes the default. This is why small actions matter more than big moments. A big moment is inspiring. A small, repeated action is transformational. By repeating the new script daily, you slowly weaken the old one, not through force, through familiarity. You are showing your subconscious, again and again, this is who we are now. Let me bring this into a story from my own life. There were countless times where I wanted to take my life in a new direction, but the old script kept pulling me back. A script built by years of habits, fear, and emotional memory. It told me I wasn't ready. It told me I wasn't capable. It told me to stay where I was. For a long time, I believed that script. But slowly, one small action at a time, I began creating a new narrative. Every time I took a small step in the direction I wanted, even when resistance was loud, I felt a shift. Not a dramatic breakthrough, but a quiet sense of alignment. A feeling of, this is possible. Over time, those small emotional victories became stronger than the old fears. The subconscious learned a new story because I lived it, not because I forced it. Now, let's look at a familiar pattern seen in many well-known individuals. People who reinvent themselves do not transform overnight. They change through a series of small, consistent actions that slowly reshape their internal identity. Actors who break out of typecasting, athletes who return stronger after setbacks, entrepreneurs who rebuild after failure, writers who continue despite rejection. Their breakthrough is the result of thousands of repetitions, where they acted in alignment with the story they wanted to live. This is how the inner script is rewritten, not through belief alone, through action, reinforced with emotion, repeated until identity shifts. Before we move to the next chapter, remember this: your subconscious does not resist you. It resists the unfamiliar. Once the new pattern becomes familiar, the resistance fades. You are not fixing yourself. You are teaching your mind a new script, and your mind is capable of learning far more than you think. Micro practice for Chapter 8. 1. Identify one old script you want to replace. 2. Write a new version of that script in one simple sentence. 3. Choose one small action today that supports the new script. 4. After completing the action, pause for 5 seconds and allow yourself to feel a small emotional win. 5. Repeat the same action tomorrow. In the next chapter, we will explore how to build momentum, maintain motivation, and prevent your subconscious from drifting back into the old patterns once the excitement of change fades. Chapter 9. Momentum. How to keep change alive when motivation fades. Every major change begins with excitement. You feel inspired, energized, ready to transform your life. But then, something predictable happens. The excitement fades, the routine becomes boring, resistance returns, and the subconscious quietly tries to pull you back to the old patterns. This chapter is about what happens after the motivation disappears. Because real transformation does not depend on motivation, it depends on momentum. Educational note. This chapter describes general self-development principles. It is for education only and not medical or therapeutic advice. Motivation is like a spark. It can start a fire, but it cannot keep the fire alive. Momentum is the fuel. Momentum comes from action, consistency, and emotional reinforcement. Most people fail to change, not because they lack motivation, but because they misunderstand how momentum works. The subconscious mind responds to what you do regularly, not what you do passionately. Let's break this down. 1. Motivation is a feeling. Momentum is a pattern. Motivation rises and falls. It is influenced by mood, energy, environment, and emotion. You cannot control motivation. No one can. Momentum, on the other hand, is built from small, repeated actions. Once you create momentum, it becomes easier to continue than to stop. The subconscious loves momentum because it loves familiarity. Once a new behavior becomes familiar, resistance weakens on its own. 2. Momentum grows from consistency, not intensity. Many people make the same mistake. They start change with intensity, big effort, big goals, big expectations. But intensity drains energy. Consistency builds identity. A 3-minute action every day creates more transformation than a 2-hour burst once a month. Why? Because the subconscious learns through repetition, not force. Small actions done often become part of your identity. Big actions done rarely stay outside your identity. 3. Momentum needs emotional reward. Your subconscious continues any behavior that feels rewarding. The reward does not have to be big. Even a small sense of accomplishment is enough. This is why checking off a task feels good, why finishing a workout feels satisfying, why completing a small goal feels energizing. The emotional reward teaches the subconscious, this behavior is safe, let's keep it. Without emotional reinforcement, momentum fades. Let's bring this into a simple example. Imagine someone wants to start journaling. They feel motivated for the first 3 days, but on day 4, they feel tired. On day 5, they skip it. On day 6, they forget. What happened? Motivation disappeared, but momentum never formed. If instead they wrote only 2 sentences a day, the pattern would continue even on low-energy days. 2 sentences are easy enough that resistance stays low, and each small completion provides a tiny emotional reward. Over time, 2 sentences turn into 5, 5 turn into 20, and the habit becomes natural. Momentum always begins with small enough to repeat. Let me share something personal. In many areas of my life, I used to wait for motivation. I thought I needed a rush of energy or inspiration to accomplish my goals. But waiting for motivation was like waiting for perfect weather. Some days it arrived, most days it didn't. Once I focused on momentum instead, everything changed. I stopped asking, how motivated do I feel today? And I started asking, what is the smallest step I can repeat today? That shift changed my relationship with progress. The subconscious learned to trust small, consistent action more than emotional excitement. Now let's look at a widely observed pattern among people who achieve big things. They do not rely on motivation. They rely on systems. They create routines small enough to continue on difficult days. They celebrate progress often. They build emotional reward into their actions. This is why they stay consistent, even when they feel tired, stressed, or uninspired. Momentum carries them when motivation does not. Your subconscious learns from this kind of structure. It begins to favor the new identity because the new pattern is repeated more often than the old one. 4. Momentum is killed by perfectionism. Perfectionism is one of the biggest enemies of transformation. It tells you that progress only counts if it is flawless. But the subconscious does not need perfection. It needs repetition. If you miss one day, perfectionism says, you failed, start over. Momentum says, continue tomorrow. If you do a task imperfectly, perfectionism says, you ruined it. Momentum says, a small step is still proof. Perfectionism destroys change. Momentum protects it. 5. Momentum accelerates identity change. Identity changes slowly at first, but once momentum builds, something surprising happens. Your subconscious begins identifying with the new behavior. You start thinking things like, I'm becoming more consistent. I'm showing up for myself. I'm the kind of person who takes action. This shift is powerful. It reduces resistance and increases confidence. Momentum makes the new identity feel real. Before we finish this chapter, I want to share a simple truth that has helped many people. You do not need to feel motivated to take a small step. You only need to take the step. The feeling of motivation often comes after action, not before it. The subconscious becomes energized by progress. This is why building momentum is far more reliable than waiting for inspiration. Remember this sentence: motivation starts change. Momentum completes it. Your future depends on which one you rely on. Micro practice for Chapter 9. 1. Pick one goal you want to build momentum in. 2. Decide the smallest daily action you can repeat without resistance. 3. Do that action today, even if it takes 1 minute. 4. After completing it, acknowledge the emotional reward. This small step keeps my momentum alive. 5. Repeat the same step tomorrow. In the next chapter, we will explore how to protect your progress, prevent relapse into old patterns, and create a subconscious environment where change becomes the natural path, not the forced one. Thank you for listening. If this part helped you, make sure to subscribe, tap the notification bell, and share this audiobook with someone who might need it. We release new parts every week, along with fresh audiobooks designed to help you grow, succeed, and reach the highest version of yourself. Self-improvement becomes much easier once you understand how it works, and we're here to guide you every step of the way. See you in the next part.